My name is Evelyn Brooks, and this is a story I've been keeping in my archive for years. It came to me in a worn envelope, postmarked 1979, but never sent. The handwriting was shaky, urgent. It belonged to a woman named Eleanor Price, a night nurse at St. Mary's Hospital in a small town called Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Eleanor wasn't famous. She didn't want to be. She worked the graveyard shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 nights a week. The hospital was quiet during those hours, just the hum of fluorescent lights, the beep of monitors, and footsteps echoing down empty hallways. But on October 14th, 1978, something happened that would haunt Eleanor for the rest of her life. I remember reading her letter for the first time. Her words were careful, measured, like she was afraid someone else might read them. And maybe someone did, because Eleanor never mailed it. She wrote, "I don't know who to tell. I don't know if anyone would believe me. But if something happens to me, someone needs to know what I found." Eleanor had been working at St. Mary's for nearly 12 years. She knew every hallway, every supply closet, every doctor and janitor by name. She prided herself on her routine, checking vitals, administering medication, sitting with patients who couldn't sleep. That night started like any other. She clocked in at 10:58 p.m. The ward was unusually quiet. Only 3 patients on the entire floor, 2 post-surgery recoveries, and 1 elderly man in room 12. His name was Walter Hastings, 81 years old, admitted 2 days earlier with pneumonia. Eleanor checked on him first. Walter was awake, staring at the ceiling. His breathing was labored, but stable. When she entered, he turned his head slowly and looked at her, not with the usual confusion of a medicated patient, but with something else, clarity. "Nurse," he whispered, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." Eleanor smiled gently. She'd heard this before. Dying patients often had last words, regrets they wanted to share. She pulled a chair beside his bed. "I'm listening, Mr. Hastings." He reached out, his bony fingers gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "They're going to come for it," he said. "Tonight, maybe tomorrow, but they'll come." Eleanor frowned. "Come for what?" Walter's eyes darted to the door, then back to her. He fumbled under his pillow and pulled out a small brass key, old, tarnished, with an ornate handle. "This," he said. "Take it, hide it, don't let them find it." But the most shocking part? She wasn't talking about a patient. Eleanor stared at the key. It felt heavier than it should have, like it carried the weight of something much larger. "Mr. Hastings, I don't understand." "You don't need to," he interrupted, his voice urgent. "Just promise me you won't give it to them." "Who's them?" But Walter didn't answer. His grip loosened, his breathing slowed. Within seconds, his eyes glazed over, and the heart monitor began its long, steady beep. Eleanor stood there, frozen, the key still in her hand. We've all been there, holding something we didn't ask for, unsure what to do with it. But Eleanor? She made a choice that night. She slipped the key into her pocket, and that choice changed everything. After Walter's body was taken to the morgue, Eleanor returned to the nurse's station. She tried to focus on her charts, but her hand kept drifting to her pocket, feeling the outline of the key. At 2:17 a.m., 2 men in dark suits entered the ward. They didn't check in at the front desk. They didn't introduce themselves. They walked straight to room 12, Walter's room, and stood in the doorway, looking inside. Eleanor watched from the station, her heart pounding. One of the men turned and walked toward her. He was tall, maybe mid-40s, with cold gray eyes. He smiled, but it didn't reach his face. "Good evening, nurse." He glanced at her name tag. "Price. We're here about Walter Hastings. We need to collect his personal effects." Eleanor kept her voice steady. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Hastings passed away about an hour ago. His belongings have been logged and stored. You'll need to speak with administration in the morning." The man's smile faded. "We're aware he passed," he said quietly. "But there's something specific we're looking for. A key. Small. Brass. Did you happen to see it?" Eleanor felt the weight of it in her pocket. "No," she lied. I didn't see anything like that. The man stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, handed her a business card, and left. Eleanor looked at the card. No name. No company. Just a phone number. That's when everything changed. Eleanor couldn't sleep that day. When she returned for her shift that night, the hospital felt different, heavier. She found herself standing outside room 12. It had already been cleaned, the bed stripped, the monitors unplugged, but something made her step inside. That's when she noticed it. The air vent above the bed was slightly askew. Eleanor dragged a chair over and climbed up. She pushed the vent cover aside and reached into the darkness. Her fingers brushed something cold. A metal box. She pulled it out, her hands trembling. It was small, locked, and the keyhole was the exact shape of the key in her pocket. I can only imagine what Eleanor felt in that moment. Curiosity? Fear? Both? She inserted the key. The lock clicked. Inside the box were 3 things. A stack of Polaroid photographs, dozens of them. A folded map of Millbrook, with several locations circled in red. A handwritten note that said, "They've been watching for 20 years. Room 7. Basement. November 3rd. Eleanor's blood ran cold. November 3rd was 9 days away. Eleanor spent the next few days trying to make sense of what she'd found. The photographs showed different people. Men, women, some young, some old, standing in front of St. Mary's Hospital. All of them looked wrong, pale, hollow-eyed, like they were there, but not really there. And every single photo had a date written on the back. The dates spanned 20 years. Eleanor cross-referenced the dates with hospital records. Every single person in those photos had died at St. Mary's, on the exact date written on their picture. Wait, don't miss this detail. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that all of them had been in room 12. Eleanor knew she should go to the police. She knew she should tell someone. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way those men had looked at her. Maybe it was the note. "They've been watching for 20 years. Or maybe it was the fact that her name was on one of the Polaroids, dated November 3rd, 1978. Eleanor stared at that photograph for hours. It showed her standing in front of St. Mary's, wearing her nurse's uniform. But she had never posed for such a picture. She had no memory of it being taken. Yet there she was, clear as day, with a date that hadn't happened yet. What would you have done? Would you have run? Would you have confronted someone? Eleanor did neither. She decided to wait. You won't believe what happened next. On November 2nd, one day before the date on her photograph, Eleanor called in sick to work. She locked her doors, closed her curtains, and sat in her living room with the metal box on her lap. She examined every photograph again. She studied the map. She read the note over and over. Room 7. Basement. St. Mary's Hospital had a basement. Eleanor had been down there a few times, mostly storage, old equipment, maintenance rooms, but she'd never seen a room 7. At 11:43 p.m., her phone rang. She didn't answer. It rang again, and again, 12 times. Finally, she picked up. "Eleanor," a voice said, calm, emotionless. "You have something that doesn't belong to you." "Who is this?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you bring the key to St. Mary's tonight. Room 7. Basement. Midnight. If you don't come, we'll come to you. And we won't be alone." The line went dead. Eleanor looked at the clock. 11:47 p.m. She had 13 minutes. Even now, Eleanor was still holding on. Eleanor made a decision. She grabbed the key, the box, and a flashlight. She drove to St. Mary's, arriving at 11:56 p.m. The parking lot was empty. The hospital loomed in the darkness, its windows glowing faintly. She entered through the side door, the one the night staff used, and took the stairs down to the basement. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The air was damp, cold. Eleanor's footsteps echoed off the concrete walls. She walked past storage rooms, past the boiler room, past the laundry. At the end of a long, narrow hallway, she found it. Room 7. The door was slightly open. Eleanor pushed it. Inside, The room was empty, except for a single hospital bed in the center, draped in white sheets, and sitting on the bed was a woman. She looked familiar. "Eleanor," the woman said softly. "You came." Eleanor's breath caught. The woman looked exactly like her. Same face, same hair, same eyes. "Who are you?" Eleanor whispered. The woman smiled sadly. "I'm what happens if you don't leave. I'm the echo, the one who stayed. What you've heard so far is only the beginning." Eleanor took a step back. Her hand tightened around the flashlight. "This doesn't make sense. You're not real." "I'm as real as you are," the woman said. "Or as real as you'll become. This hospital, it doesn't let people go." Not really. Walter knew that. He tried to warn them for years, but they silenced him. Just like they'll silence you. "Who's they?" The woman stood. Behind her, the walls began to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone. "The ones who built this place. The ones who've been feeding it. Every death in room 12? It's not an accident, Eleanor. It's a sacrifice." Eleanor's vision blurred. She stumbled backward. "You have a choice," the woman continued. "Give them the key, let them continue, or destroy it and set us all free." "How do I destroy it?" The woman's expression darkened. "There's a place, a chapel, 20 miles north of here. It was built before the hospital, before any of this started. That's where it all began. And that's where it has to end." Before Eleanor could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate. The men in suits were coming. "Go," the woman urged. "Now. Through the back exit. Don't let them catch you." Eleanor ran. Just when they thought it was over, Evelyn spoke again. Eleanor burst through the basement's back exit and into the cold November night. She could hear voices behind her, shouting, commands. She sprinted to her car and drove. She didn't stop until she was miles away from Millbrook, parked on the side of a dark country road, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. "I want you to understand something about Eleanor. She wasn't brave. She wasn't special. She was just a nurse, a woman who worked the night shift and went home to an empty apartment. But sometimes, ordinary people are thrust into extraordinary circumstances, and they have to decide who they're going to be. Eleanor decided she wasn't going to run anymore. She was going to end this." The next morning, Eleanor drove north. She followed the directions her double had given her, winding through back roads and dense forest. After an hour, she found it. The chapel. It was hidden deep in the woods, overgrown with vines and moss. It looked abandoned, like no one had set foot inside for decades. The wooden door was heavy, warped with age. Eleanor had to push hard to open it. Inside, the air was cold, too cold. Her breath came out in white clouds. The walls were covered in carvings, strange symbols, words in a language she didn't recognize. Pews lay broken and scattered. The altar at the far end was cracked, crumbling, and beneath the altar, set into the floor, was a metal door, locked. Eleanor knelt down and examined the lock. Brass, old, ornate, the same design as the key. The voice was familiar, too familiar. Eleanor inserted the key. The lock turned with a sound like grinding bone. The door swung open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to run, to forget she'd ever found this place. But she thought of Walter Hastings, dying alone in room 12. She thought of the photographs, all those people, trapped, echoing through time. She thought of her double, still sitting in that basement room. Eleanor descended. The stairs went down for what felt like miles. The walls were damp, rough stone. The air grew colder with every step. Finally, she reached the bottom. A circular chamber, stone floor, stone walls, and in the center, illuminated by a shaft of pale light from above, was a table. On the table was a book, thick, leather-bound, ancient. Eleanor approached slowly. The book was open to a page filled with names, hundreds of them. She recognized some. Walter Hastings, October 14th, 1978. Margaret Lynch, July 2nd, 1965. Robert Crowley, December 19th, 1952. And at the very bottom of the page, written in fresh ink, Eleanor Price, November 3rd, 1978. Eleanor stared at her name. November 3rd had passed. It was November 4th now. She should have been dead. But she wasn't. But here's the thing no one tells you about running from the past. Eleanor reached out and touched the page. The ink was still wet, smudging under her fingertips. She flipped back through the book. The names went back centuries. Some dated as far back as 1847, the year St. Mary's Hospital was founded. But these weren't just names. Each entry had notes beside it. Walter Hastings, non-compliant. Contract, voided. Margaret Lynch, escaped. Retrieval, unsuccessful. Eleanor Price, contract active, awaiting completion. Contract, the word repeated on every page. Eleanor's mind raced. Walter had called it a sacrifice. Her double had called it feeding. But this book called it a contract. What kind of contract? And who had signed it? Eleanor heard something behind her. She spun around. A figure stood at the base of the stairs. Tall, thin, draped in shadows. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said. Its voice was neither male nor female. Layered, like a dozen voices speaking at once. "What is this place?" Eleanor demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "A ledger," the figure said, stepping closer. "Every name written here is a debt paid. A life given to keep the hospital alive. Keep it alive? It's just a building." The figure laughed, a sound like wind through broken glass. "Is it? St. Mary's was built on sacred ground soaked in blood. The founders made a pact, a place of healing, in exchange for a tithe, one life per year, taken at the right time, in the right place. Room 12, Eleanor whispered. Room 12, the figure confirmed. The threshold between life and death. And you, Eleanor, you were chosen. What Eleanor did next shocked everyone, including herself. Eleanor looked down at the book, then at the key in her hand. "I didn't choose anything," she said. "Walter gave me this key. I didn't ask for it. But you took it," the figure said. "You kept it. That is choice enough. The key binds you to the contract, and the contract must be fulfilled." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the key. "What if I destroy it?" The figure stopped moving. "You can't. Watch me." Eleanor grabbed the book off the table. She turned and ran back up the stairs, clutching it to her chest. Behind her, the figure screamed. A sound like metal tearing, like 1,000 voices crying out at once. The chapel began to shake. The walls cracked. The floor split open. Eleanor burst through the door and into the woods, just as the entire structure collapsed behind her, imploding inward, dragging everything into darkness. She didn't stop running until she reached her car. She threw the book into the passenger seat and drove. For hours, for days. She crossed state lines. She paid cash for everything. She avoided cameras, avoided people. But no matter how far she drove, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was following her. Even the strongest hearts can break in silence. Eleanor ended up in a small town in Maine. So small it didn't even have a name on most maps. She rented a cabin by the ocean and locked herself inside. The book sat on the kitchen table, untouched. For 3 days, Eleanor didn't open it. She barely ate. She barely slept. She just sat by the window, watching the ocean, waiting. On the 4th day, she couldn't take it anymore. She opened the book. Her name was still there. Eleanor Price, November 3rd, 1978. But the note beside it had changed. Contract breached. Retrieval in progress. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She looked out the window. The ocean was calm. The sky was clear. No cars on the road. No people on the beach. But something felt wrong. At 11:43 p.m., the exact time Walter had given her the key, her phone rang. Eleanor didn't have a phone. The cabin didn't have a landline. She'd thrown away her cell phone weeks ago. But the ringing continued. She followed the sound to the kitchen. An old rotary phone sat on the counter, one that definitely hadn't been there before. It rang again. Eleanor picked it up. "Hello, Eleanor," a voice said. Her own voice. "You can't run from this. You know that, don't you? The book is the contract. And as long as it exists, you're bound to it. I'll burn it, Eleanor said. Others have tried. It always comes back, because it's not paper and ink. It's something older, something that exists outside of time. Then what do I do? Silence. Then, you rewrite it. This was the moment everything could change. Eleanor stared at the book. How? The same way it was written, her voice said through the phone. In sacrifice, in choice, but not your sacrifice, and not their choice. I don't understand. You will. Go back to St. Mary's. Go back to room 12. Finish what Walter started. The line went dead. Eleanor stood there for a long time, the phone still in her hand. She thought about running again. She thought about throwing the book into the ocean, burning it, burying it, but she knew it wouldn't matter. The book would come back. It always came back. So Eleanor made a decision. She got in her car and drove back to Millbrook. The return to St. Mary's was inevitable. The hospital looked exactly the same. Same brick facade, same flickering lights in the windows, same parking lot, now half empty in the early morning darkness. Eleanor walked through the front doors at 11:43 p.m., the same time everything had started. The night nurse at the desk looked up and smiled, a practiced, professional smile. Can I help you? I'm here for room 12, Eleanor said. The nurse's smile faded. She didn't ask questions. She just handed Eleanor a visitor's pass and pointed down the hall. Eleanor walked slowly, the book tucked under her arm. Her footsteps echoed in the empty corridor. When she reached room 12, the door was open. Inside, the bed was empty. But sitting in the chair beside it was the woman, her double. You came back, the woman said softly. I had to, Eleanor replied. You could have kept running. No, Eleanor said. I couldn't. The woman stood. She looked tired, sad. Do you understand now? The contract isn't about death. It's about choice. Every person in that book had a choice. Walter chose to warn you. Others chose to fight. And you chose to come back. Eleanor set the book on the bed. The voice on the phone, my voice, told me I could rewrite it. You can, the woman said, but it requires sacrifice. Whose? The woman reached into her pocket and pulled out a pen. Theirs. She pointed to the doorway. Two men in dark suits stood there, watching. What Eleanor did next defied every rule. Eleanor opened the book to a blank page. The men started walking toward her. Stop, one of them commanded. But Eleanor had already begun writing, not her name, their names. As she wrote, the room began to shake. The lights flickered. The monitors beeped erratically. The woman, her double, began to fade, becoming translucent. You're breaking the contract, she whispered, her voice distant now. You're setting us free. Eleanor kept writing, name after name, the men in suits, the figures who had built this place, the ones who had orchestrated the deaths for over a century. Outside the room, the hospital groaned, a deep, resonant sound like the earth shifting. The men clutched their chests. They fell to their knees. One by one, their names appeared in the book, and one by one, they vanished, dissolving into smoke, into nothing. The woman smiled. Thank you, she whispered, and then she was gone too. But freedom always comes with a price. Eleanor stood alone in room 12. The shaking had stopped. The lights had stabilized. She looked down at the book. All the names were still there. Walter, Margaret, Robert, hundreds of others. But the notes beside them had changed. Contract fulfilled. Released. Eleanor closed the book. She walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. It was empty. The black cars were gone. The men were gone. But St. Mary's Hospital was still standing. Eleanor left that night. She walked out of the hospital, got in her car, and drove away from Millbrook for the last time. She moved to Oregon. She changed her name. She never worked as a nurse again. But she kept the book, not to read, not to open, just to remember. Because some contracts can be broken, some debts can be rewritten, but the memory of them, that stays forever. I found Eleanor's letter 30 years after she wrote it. She mailed it to my radio station in Portland with a note that said, If anyone should tell this story, it should be you. I don't know why she chose me. Maybe she heard my voice on the airwaves and thought I'd understand. Maybe she just needed someone to believe her. I do believe her. Because 5 years ago I visited Millbrook. I went to St. Mary's Hospital. Room 12 is still there, but it's been empty for decades. The nurses say they won't assign patients to it anymore. They say they hear things at night, footsteps, whispers, the sound of someone writing. When I stood outside that room, I swear I felt it too. A presence, watching, waiting, but not threatening, just remembering. Eleanor Price died in 2009. She was 76 years old. Peaceful, they said, in her sleep. They found the book in her closet, locked in a metal box, wrapped in chains. No one has opened it since. This has been Evelyn Brooks. And this was Eleanor Price's story. If you ever find yourself holding something you didn't ask for, a key, a book, a secret, remember this. You always have a choice. Even when it doesn't feel like it. Even when the night is dark and the road is long. You always have a choice. And sometimes, the bravest choice is not to run, but to turn around and face what's chasing you.